Hi everyone, this is Jim. Welcome to this Blitz chess postmortem, a postmortem of my Blitz game number 300. I was white here, and I kicked off with e4, and we got d5, the center counter defense. So I take the normal move, and my opponent takes with the queen, which is also the most popular move here. And now I play this maybe a little bit in the wrong order. I play the immediate d4. Which is a line against the knight f6 and knight takes. You can often play d4 there. Here, I guess it works. I mean, it's not an awful move, but the most accurate move is knight to c3, kicking the queen immediately. After d4, you see white still has an advantage here, and my opponent plays the normal knight f6, and I play knight f3, defending my pawn, which is not yet under attack, but black always has this idea of bringing his knight to c6, and then he'll have two pieces on the pawn. So this has to be played sooner or later. Well, some defense for the pawn needs to be put in place. There's also the idea of playing c3. But I have the idea of playing c4 all in one move, so I don't want to take a half step with c3. So this is an interesting position here. If I don't do anything and allow black to take my knight, and I take back with the queen, then I lose the pawn. That's just hanging because both defenders, even though it's defended twice, the bishop gets rid of one defender, and when I take back with the queen, that gets rid of another defender, and black is just a pawn up. So I have to be aware of this, and I could play a move like c3. It is bishop e2 is a playable move here. For some reason I didn't like this, but bishop e2 makes sense. Takes. My queen is still defending the pawn, and if he attacks with his knight, say I play bishop e2, for example, and if he attacks with the knight, then here's a place where I can play c4 and counterattack his queen. So that should be okay. Or it says I can even just castle and ignore it. That's interesting. Castle, and how about if he tries to grab the pawn? Okay, because I'll take back with the bishop, and once again I'll have to move the queen. And that's a neat trick. This back up for a second. The knight goes with check, so he loses his queen there. So in this position, he can't actually, it's not safe for him to take that pawn. Okay, so that's why bishop e2 is quite a sound move here if we back up to the position. Yeah, so I can just play bishop e2 and castle, and there are various ways of defending this pawn involving either c4, or if he exchanges the bishop on this diagonal, takes his knight with check, winning the queen if the queen grabs the pawn. So nothing to worry about there. Instead I played the more cautious move bishop e3, which has a real drawback. Okay, we're out of the opening book here. And the drawback is that black can take my knight now, and my pawn is defended, but my pawns get messed up. So, but black had to give something up to get to this position. He had to give up the bishop pair. So I have two bishops, and he only has one. So that's the advantage of the bishop pair. And I also have these open lines. And without the queens on the board, I'm not so worried about my king getting checkmated. So it's not an immediate problem. These doubled pawns will become weak in the endgame, but they're not an immediate problem for the middle game here. And so what we have here, this is not yet the endgame. There's enough force on the board that this is really, it's a queenless middle game. And so I need to do something active with my pieces here, maybe grab some space, get some other kind of compensation, because in the long run these pawn weaknesses are going to be a problem. Okay, so my opponent continues with e6, normal developing moves, and I go c4. And you know, the engine rates this as just slightly better for white. Knight bd7, maybe knight c6 was probably a little more accurate there. a3, I wanted to stop the pin because I wanted to develop my knight to to c3. I didn't want the bishop pinning it there and maybe exchanging and causing even more damage. Also, it's nice to have a knight to complement the bishops, I think, in these positions. So he goes c6 here, and knight c3. And you know, we can pause a little bit after some development. I mean, we weren't necessarily making the most accurate moves, but they're all reasonable moves, and still white retains some slight advantage. So the engine is still of the opinion that the two bishops, the advantage is outweighs the disadvantage of the doubled pawns here. So I just think that's interesting. So let's see how we can play. Bishop e7 and rook g1, putting my rook on an open file. He plays g6 to defend, and then I castle queenside. It's not that I need to castle so much as I want to connect these rooks, get this rook into play, and the king may be safer over here on the queen side than in the middle. It's hard to say. But these the pieces need to get out and play. My opponent castles queenside, and I go knight e4. And now I'm willing to trade my knight in this circumstance, because if he takes my knight, it undoubles my pawn and gives me a strong center, so I'd just be in a great position there. So my opponent naturally doesn't do that. He plays h6, stopping my knight from coming into g4, hitting his weak f7 pawn. And then I spot this idea. The engine says I should continue on with the queenside expansion of b4. That's a very logical plan. I can understand that. I spotted a different idea, which is I noticed he's got this kind of dark squared weaknesses here. Even though he has a dark squared bishop, there's a potential hole in his position there because of his pawn structure. And so I was trying to take advantage of that by placing a bishop here and maybe placing a knight. I also realized if I put a bishop here and he takes, I come in with a knight check, and then I take here, forking his two rooks. So that's a winning tactic for me. He plays a5. And now I did not play bishop to e6. I think he can safely ignore it. This is what I calculated here. Let's take a look at this variation. If I just play there, yeah, he just moves his rook to e8, for example, and defends the bishop, and I don't really have any advantage. In this position, the engine is recommending knight d6 check, the immediate knight d6 check, or king to c2. Okay, so king to c2 is kind of a nothing move. I had the idea of just continuing to put pressure on the dark squares here. Looks like e5 would be a good counter. Oh, no, okay, the engine changed its mind. Knight takes e4. Now it wants to take the knight. Okay, my opponent didn't play that. He played knight to d5. I think that's a very logical move. I had opened up this hole, and he puts his knight on that square. That's still only slightly better for white. And now bishop to g3. Oh yeah, his knight was hitting my bishop, so I dropped it back. I wasn't ready to park the bishop on that square just yet. He plays f5, kicking my knight, and sort of forcing me into playing what I intended to play, knight d6. So this is a very strong piece, and he decides to trade it off. Probably a good choice. Oh yeah, if he moves the king, I can still do this fork on f7, so he's got to take it. And I take back. And I've still got this strong piece in my enemy's camp, and so this, I think, is going to give me something to play with the rest of the game, or play for. And also prevents his king from escaping to safety if his king wants to get over to the B file or the A file. It's cut off. But he does have the idea of rerouting his knights and taking my bishop, so he can get rid of this nuisance eventually. It'll just take some time. I went for rook. No, it's his move here. He went rook to g8, defending the g pawn, and I went bishop c4, getting my last piece off the back rank and connecting my rooks. And he went knight 7 to f6. Cancel. The other knight. He went this knight to f6. Okay, either way is good. Then I went rook d to e1. So I wanted to keep pressure on this pawn, and then I wanted to introduce pressure on this pawn. So I'm hitting his backward pawns here. And he plays king d7. The engine approves. And now I went rook e5, which is a mistake. Rook e5 cuts off the retreat of my bishop. So after rook e5, he can play knight e8 here, and I can't go anywhere with the bishop. So he can just win a pawn there. So I need to play something different here. Probably h4. I think the computer suggests that, and that's a very logical move. Just trying to weaken black structure over here on the king side, and at the same time get rid of one of my pawn weaknesses. I have basically 3 isolated pawns over here, this one and this double isolated pair. So if I can get rid of some of those, it'll help me out, and maybe I can create weaknesses over here. So that's the way to play it. So this is a mistake, and luckily for me, he went after the other bishop with b5 instead of this bishop. So the engine thinks I should go ahead and take the knight. I drop back with the bishop. Okay, once again allowing him to play knight e8. But he didn't play that. He played rook g to e8 instead. And that's a mistake. That just drops a pawn over here. He just left his pawn undefended, so just a slip. And now I'm better. Although I don't stay better the whole game, so it's interesting. There's one point here. I should just win from this point because now I have all the advantages are mine. I have material, and the pawn weaknesses pretty much cancel out at this point. I have an extra pawn and I have the bishop pair, so should be pretty straightforward win. But there's still some tricks, and he starts out with knight h5, and I should probably take his knight. That would make things simpler, but I grabbed the pawn instead, still winning. And then he went to f4. That was his idea with this knight maneuver. And now there's a threat of knight there, checking my king, and forking my king and my rook. And so that's why I played bishop to c2, defending against that threat. But this is one of those positions where after you recognize your opponent's threat, you need to look to see if you have a bigger threat. and white does have a bigger threat. I didn't realize this till later. But rook c7 is a real strong move here. It's check. So, of course, he doesn't have time to play his knight move. He's got to get his king out of check. And he can't interpose anything, really. He's got to move the king. Knight e7 is possible, I guess. Knight e7. Then rook e3, dropping back. Okay, so that would be a way to play it with the rook e3 coming back. So he can still block the check, but he's all tied up after that and pinned, and that's pretty good for me. And if the king goes back to c8, then I have this check here. Oh, his knight is guarding the check on c7, so I have to take the knight. Bishop takes, knight takes, and rook a7 coming over to this side. Okay, so anyway, it looks pretty good for white. I'm invading, and I'm a couple of pieces up. So just taking the knight is probably good too. Bishop takes d5, and if he goes in for the check, I wonder what happens after this actually. Bishop takes d5, and if he goes for the check, king d2, knight e5, now rook h7 check. Okay, the timing of this is important. King c8, and bishop takes e6 check. Getting the bishop out of hock that way. Rook takes e6, and rook c7 check. Now this is interesting. I mean, I've given up a piece here, but king there, and then d takes e5. Now I'm down the exchange, but I have some pawns, and I've got his king all tied up. So that's a complicated line. that's the kind of thing that's too deep to see in Blitz, but it's interesting nonetheless that there's a couple different ways I have of ignoring his threat here. Instead, I played the defensive move, bishop to c2, defending against the threat, and now the engine switches to equal. He has this really neat tactic here where he plays rook h8. He didn't play this in the game, but this is how he wins. This rook has nowhere to go, basically. Well, I could play it. No. All the escape squares, that's covered by one knight, and that's covered by the other knight. So the rook has nowhere to go. So I have to take. And then this pawn is hanging over here, and he's invading. I have to drop my rook back, and he picks up a pawn, and suddenly the tables have turned. Well, it's not completely turned. It's still an even position, but black is equalized with that rook h8 move. So always got to be alert for these moves. So black should have been looking for ways to get out of his predicament, and rook h8 seems to be a nice way. So instead he played b4 here, pushing on. He had an interesting idea, which is maybe to harass my bishop and then get this fork again, but it doesn't quite work. Now, once again, I can play rook h7 here. I take, and he took back with the knight, and now he's threatening to take here. But when he takes here, the fork is no longer threatened because my king is moving away from the forking position. So I really didn't have to do anything. I moved my king when I could have just played rook h7 again here, or also rook e3. I guess this threat is knight e3, bishop takes, knight e3, and that is a fork. So I need to do something about that. I played king d2, and this still keeps an advantage, so this is not bad. He traded, and played a4, but now I have a significant edge, and I just get my rook out of the way with a tempo hitting his knight. His knight goes to d5, and bring my rook over to g1. I have the idea of invading here. By now I had noticed the checks, and I was just looking for the right moment to apply them. He went knight b4, check, and I just went king b1 to avoid future checks, and then he brought his knight to d3, which is active, but unfortunately left off the defense, so he no longer has. With the knight on d5, he always had this knight e7 idea, but that's no longer there. And so now this invasion is fatal. Rook g7 leads to a mate, a forced mate. He went to king c8, and I played my rook here, and he resigned at this point. But I just have to double my rooks on the 7th rank, and I can checkmate him over here, it looks like. So anyway, I had fun with that game. I thought there was interesting kind of strategical battle in the first half. Whether the bishop pair is worth more than the doubled pawns are a deficit. which of those factors weighs more? It seems they were pretty evenly in balance, although maybe a slight edge for white through most of that. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. Leave any comments you have in the section below, and I will see you again soon. Bye.